So, to introduce Vivian, who presumably needs very little introduction to this audience, but just to briefly say that working as a journalist at the Village Voice in the 1970s, Vivian Gornick honed her skills as an essayist and made her name as a feminist polemicist. It was her groundbreaking book-length work of literary memoir, the absolutely stunning Fierce Attachments, that cemented her reputation as a giant of personal narrative writing. That book, published in 1987, is an extreme close-up account of her own relationship with her mother. We had a bit of a conversation about interactions between mothers and daughters and how particular or general that is. So in the years since the publication of that classic literary memoir, Gornick has continued to explore the possibilities of personal narrative and non-fiction through biography, literary criticism and essays. And her latest book is the just absolutely gorgeous, glorious The Odd Woman in the City, and that's what we're here tonight to talk about. So welcome, Vivian.
Thank you.
So we thought we would start with Vivian reading a couple of bits from the book for those who haven't yet had the chance to read it, to get a sense of the book, and Vivian's going to introduce the book a little bit.
We are going to speak mainly about this book, The Odd Woman and the City. I'm going to explain how the book comes together for you. Let me explain the title to begin with, because I'm constantly being asked what the odd woman means or who the odd woman is. Obviously, the odd woman is me, and the city is New York. And the words odd woman come from a novel by the great Victorian novelist George Gissing. George Gissing wrote a book called The Odd Women in the late 19th century. Now, to back up a little bit, the modern movement for women's rights begins in the French Revolution with Mary Wollstonecraft and the vindication of the rights of women. Every 50 years after that, the feminist movement raises its ugly little head and we start all over again. And each time around, we're called something else. Free women, new women, liberated women, but Gissing called us the odd women, and for me, he nailed it. When I read The Odd Women, I see my generation plain. So in that sense, I consider myself the odd woman. And what he meant by the odd women was the women who could not make their peace with the world as it was. It's the best way I can explain myself and the second wave of American feminism and the way I feel about it, and I think the way a lot of other women feel about it. Now, this book, I live alone. I've lived alone for a very long time. The statistics in New York are that 50% of New York households are single-person households. So there's a lot of us out there, more than history has ever supplied. I don't think ever before in history have so many people of our stripe and condition been living alone. So ours is a generation, this is men and women alike. Ours is a generation that has lived out its conflicts, not its fantasies. And so many of us are by way of being the odd person in the city. And the thing about the city, especially New York, is how extraordinarily welcoming it is to the solitary soul. Whether people have responded who've come or who've grown up in it as I have, or have come to it out of temperamental choice, whatever it is, and however they've ever described it, and there have been many, many different kinds of description over many years, the fact is the city welcomes you in the sense that there's street theater all the time. There isn't a moment when people aren't acting out in New York. And if you're up for it, you can get into it. And I'm up for it, and I have gotten into it for many, many years. So now, another thing, I have a friend, a man I call Leonard in this book. He's been my friend for 30 years. He's gay, I'm odd, and that's the source of our friendship. So that friendship runs like a Greek chorus through this. And then there is the city, and then there is my attempt at different times in the book to try to understand how I myself came to be as I am. So there are three strands. It's like a collage. It is a collage in which the friendship with Leonard is a dominant strand, and then my adventures on the streets is a dominant strand, and this other element of personal meditation. I'm going to read you the first few pages of the book and the last few, and that will just give you a little bit of a feel for it, okay? All right. Leonard and I are having coffee at a restaurant in Midtown. So I begin, how does your life feel to you these days? Like a chicken bone stuck in my craw, he says. I can't swallow it and I can't cough it up. Right now, I'm trying to just not choke on it. My friend Leonard is a witty, intelligent gay man, sophisticated about his own unhappiness. The sophistication is energizing. Once, a group of us read George Kennan's memoir and met to discuss the book. You'll remember George Kennan was a Cold War diplomat. A civilized and poetic man, said one. A cold warrior riddled with nostalgia, said another. Weak passions, strong ambitions, and a continual sense of himself in the world, said a third. This is the man who has humiliated me my entire life, said Leonard. Leonard's take on Kennan renewed in me the thrill of revisionist history, the domesticated drama of seeing the world each day anew through the eyes of the aggrieved, and reminded me of why we are friends. We share the politics of damage, Leonard and I, an impassioned sense of having been born into preordained social inequity burns brightly in each of us. Our subject is the unlived life. The question for each of us, would we have manufactured the inequity had one not been there ready-made? He's gay, I'm the odd woman, for our grievances to make use of. To this question, our friendship is devoted. The question, in fact, defines the friendship, gives it its character and its idiom, and has shed more light on the mysterious nature of ordinary human relations than has any other intimacy I have known. For more than 20 years now, Leonard and I have met once a week for a walk, dinner, and a movie, either in his neighborhood or mine. Except for the 2 hours in the movie, we hardly ever do anything else but talk. One of us is always saying, let's get tickets for a play, a concert, a reading, but neither of us ever seems able to arrange an evening in advance of the time we are to meet. The fact is, ours is the most satisfying conversation either of us has, and we can't bear to give it up even for 1 week. It's the way we feel about ourselves when we are talking that draws us so strongly to each other. I once had my picture taken by 2 photographers on the same day. Each likeness was me, definitely me, but to my eyes, the face in one photograph looked broken and faceted, the one in the other of a piece. It's the same with me and Leonard. The self-image each of us projects to the other is the one we carry around in our heads, the one that makes us feel coherent. Why then, one might ask, do we not meet more often than once a week? Take in more of the world together, extend each other the comfort of the daily chat. The problem is we both have a penchant for the negative. Whatever the circumstance, for each of us, the glass is perpetually half empty. Either he is registering loss, failure, defeat, or I am. We cannot help ourselves. We would like it to be otherwise, but it is the way life feels to each of us, and the way life feels is inevitably the way life is lived. One night at a party, I fell into a disagreement with a friend of ours who was famous for his debating skills. At first, I responded nervously to his every challenge, but soon I found my sea legs, and then I stood my ground more successfully than he did. People crowded round me. That was wonderful, they said, wonderful. I turned eagerly to Leonard. You were nervous, he said. Another time, I went to Florence. You're a good audience. Another time, I went to Florence with my niece. How was it, Leonard asked. The city was lovely, I said. My niece is great. You know, it's hard to be with someone 24 hours a day for 8 days. But we traveled well together, walked miles along the Arno. That river is beautiful. That is sad, Leonard said, that you found it irritating to be so much with your niece. A third time I went to the beach for the weekend. It rained one day, was sunny another. Again, Leonard asked how it had been. Refreshing, I said. The rain didn't daunt you, he said. I remind myself of what my voice can sound like, my voice forever edged in judgment, that also never stops registering the flaw, the absence, the incompleteness, my voice that so often causes Leonard's eyes to flicker and his mouth to tighten. At the end of an evening together, one or the other of us will impulsively suggest that we meet again during the week, but only rarely does the impulse live long enough to be acted upon. We mean it, of course, when we are saying goodbye, want nothing more than to renew the contact immediately. But going up in the elevator to my apartment, I start to feel on my skin the sensory effect of an evening full of irony and negative judgment. Nothing serious, just surface damage, 1,000 tiny pinpricks dotting arms, neck, chest. But somewhere within me, in a place I cannot even name, I begin to shrink from the prospect of feeling it again soon. A day passes, then another. I must call Leonard, I say to myself, but repeatedly, the hand about to reach for the phone fails to move. He, of course, must be feeling the same, as he doesn't call either. The unacted upon impulse accumulates into a failure of nerve. Failure of nerve hardens into ennui. When the cycle of mixed feeling, failed nerve, and paralyzed will has run its course, the longing to meet again acquires urgency, and the hand reaching for the phone will complete the action. Leonard and I consider ourselves intimates because our cycle takes only a week to complete. Okay, that's the that's the beginning. And a lot of things happen in between, and here is the end, which will sort of bring it together. A friend reads what I've been writing and says to me over coffee, "You're romanticizing the street. Don't you know that New York has lost 75% of its manufacturing base?" In my mind's eye, I stare into the faces of all the women and men with whom I interact daily. "Hey, you people," I address them silently. "Did you hear what my friend just said? The city is doomed. The middle class has deserted New York. The corporations are in Texas, Jersey, Taiwan. You're gone. You're out of here. It's all over. How come you're still on the street?" "New York isn't jobs," they reply. "It's temperament. Most people are in New York because they need evidence in large quantities of human expressiveness, and they need it not now and then, but every day. That is what they need. Those who go off to the manageable cities can do without. Those who come to New York cannot. Or perhaps I should say that it is I who cannot. It's the voices I can't do without. In most cities of the world, the populace is planted in centuries of cobblestone alleys, ruined churches, architectural relics, none of which are ever dug up, only piled one on top of another. If you've grown up in New York, your life is an archaeology, not of structures, but of voices, also piled one on top of another, also not really replacing one another. On 6th Avenue, two small, dark-skinned men lean against a parked cab. One says to the other, "Look, it's very simple. A is the variable costs, B is the gross income, C is the overhead. Get that?" The other man shakes his head no. "Dummy," the first man cries, "you gotta get it." On Park Avenue, a well-dressed matron says to her friend, "When I was young, men were the main course. Now they're a condiment." I made none of this up. On 57th Street, one boyish-looking man says to another, "I didn't realize you were such good friends. What did she give you that you miss her so?" "It wasn't what she gave me," the other replies. "It was what she didn't take away." As the cabbie on 6th Avenue says, someone's got to get it, and late in the day, someone does. I am walking on 8th Avenue during the 5 o'clock rush, thinking of changing a word in a sentence, and somewhere in the 40s, I don't notice the light turning red. Halfway into the path of an oncoming truck, I am lifted off my feet by a pair of hands on my upper arms and pulled back onto the curb. The hands do not release me immediately. I am pressed to the chest of the person to whom the hands belong. I can still feel the beating heart against my back. When I turn to thank my rescuer, I am looking into the middle-aged face of an overweight man with bright blue eyes, straw-colored hair, and a beet red face. A tourist. We stare wordlessly at each other. I'll never know what the man is thinking at this moment, but the expression on his face is unforgettable. Me, I am merely shaken, but he looks as though transfigured by what has just happened. His eyes are fixed on mine, but I see that they are really looking inward. I realize that this is his experience, not mine. It is he who has felt the urgency of life. He is still holding it in his hands. 2 hours later, I am home, having dinner at my table, looking out at the city. My mind flashes on all who crossed my path today. I hear their voices, I see their gestures, I start filling in lives for them. Soon they are company, great company. I think to myself, I'd rather be here with you tonight than with anyone else I know. Well, almost anyone else I know. I look up at the great clock on my wall, the one that gives the date as well as the hour. It's time to call Leonard. Thank you.
I mean,
okay, now you got it?
Yeah. It's just such a rich book, and I'm always, I don't quite know where to start, but I guess maybe if we start with this moment where this man pulls you back off the street, and I guess when I read it, I thought there's a series of moments throughout the book where, in a way, people are made beautiful by human interaction. You talk about a child on the subway.
Yes.
You talk, this closing vignette. You talk about the memory of an interaction with a pizza delivery man. You say it reminds you of the astonishment of human existence. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about that, about this kind of idea of people being made beautiful by human interaction and how you come to this.
Don't you all feel that?
Sometimes.
Actually, a little vignette that is in the book, and that is an example of what Jordy is talking about now, and what I do genuinely feel, was I got on the subway one day, and a man was sitting across from me with a little boy who was horribly deformed. The kid looked like the Elephant Man. He was horribly deformed. His face was in two halves. He had a tube in his throat. He was deaf-mute. Obviously, he couldn't. And I was horrified, and then I couldn't take my eyes off him, and I didn't want to keep my eyes on him, right? So I didn't know what to do. But in a few minutes, these two started talking with their hands to each other. And I swear to you, as the stations went by, and I did then just watch them, that little boy became beautiful. And he became beautiful because of the delight in the face of his father. I guess it was his father. His father delighted in that child. And as that child was delighted in, he became beautiful. And I do feel that, and I feel that very often on the streets of New York, because I do enter into a great deal of interaction with people. Things happen, and it is, when I am having a bad day, it is definitely my way of redeeming myself and redeeming life. And that's the thing about the city. It constantly reminds you of how astonishing human existence can be when you can forget about it all the time, right?
And I guess, but alongside that, you write a lot about loneliness.
Yes.
About holding on to loneliness and almost the pleasure in holding on to a loneliness.
It's a double-edged sword.
And I guess, do you think there's a necessary kind of relationship between this kind of love of interaction and love of loneliness, or?
Between the interaction of me on the street? Yes,
for you,
definitely.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I live alone, and so if you live alone, you suffer gross loneliness, right? Without any other neurotic addition to it. Yeah, I don't think it's natural to live in solitary, and if you do it long enough, it has a penetrating effect on you, and you either give into it or you don't. You struggle with it or against it, and then you're amazed to find how many people feel alone, no matter whether they are actually living alone or living with other people. And I look upon it as a natural condition now. I used to think the most natural of elements of human existence was to be connected. I don't actually believe that anymore, which is not an indictment of life. I just think it's a much more the commonest experience, is of feeling solitary in this life. And it's debilitating. It's like a disease. Now, solitude is a wonderful thing, absolutely necessary. And I experienced that too. When a solitary life is not necessarily a lonely life. So you can have both elements of it as long as you're in one piece. And for me, the street has always been a salvation. And, I am hardly the first person to say this, to feel this, to act on this. What I wanted to do originally, long ago, was write this book only putting myself down on the street. A middle-aged, divorced feminist walks the streets of a great city. Now, this is an old tradition, and it has been occupied by men solely, and great writers. Gissing, Baudelaire, Dickens, Walter Benjamin, all kinds of people have acted as what came to be known as the flaneur, the one who walks the writer who, without purpose, walks the streets of the city and sees himself in relation, or herself in relation to the crowd. And that was something that came naturally to me, and so I let it come naturally to me. And it's remarkable how often, sealed up in the house, I live alone, I work alone, you can get sealed up in the house and forget the whole world, but the minute you're out on the street, you're back in touch.
And so you walk every day, is that right?
Oh yes.
Yep. And I mean, I guess, the way you write about the flaneur and Benjamin and Baudelaire, it felt to me a very romantic view of the city and of the public and of a building of a community through interaction.
No, they're not building communities. It's the other way around. You're all recognizing the solitariness of everyone in the crowd.
Sure.
It's not community at all. It's the opposite. It's the recognition of that sort of whirling isolation and the acceptance of it.
And so this kind of, I guess, I was interested in this relationship between walking and writing.
Yes.
And, could you do one without the other? Could you walk as well if you didn't write, do you think? Could you write if you didn't walk?
As people have often said to me, Vivian, you can walk because you don't have a job. I'm often told that in New York. Of course you walk. Look she walks 3 hours a day. She doesn't have a job. Yeah. Well, I don't know. If I had a job, I'd have more structure. I'd be among people. I often envy people who work in any capacity that provides institutional. I don't really want to be in an institution, but I do envy structure and the constant the company of colleagues. And maybe I envy it because I don't have it, and God knows plenty of people say they envy me. So who knows?
And I guess as well, like the practice of writing and walking and the way they inform each other in the ways.
In my case, yes.
Yeah.
Lots of writers don't walk.
Yeah.
And they don't live in New York.
Yeah. You talk at the beginning of Fierce Attachments, your previous memoir.
Yes.
You have this beautiful phrase that stuck with me of when I was rereading it recently. You use a phrase, you're talking about you and your mother's lives accumulating. And you also use this word accumulate, I guess, in this book. And I was sort of struck by that idea, and it seems to quite encapsulate the ways in which you, I guess, describe your life or the ways in which you're remembering the scenarios. And I guess this idea of collage and that your book, it's not a series of chapters, it's a series of moments.
It's an ongoing.
And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit about this.
I never did understand how or why I stumbled on that style, but then it clearly was mine. Almost everything I've written that's book length is written that way, in a kind of collage style. I don't know how to make chapters. And so what I write feels like whatever skill I have goes into the transitions, right? And this book, I rewrote these things 50 times, fooling around with these sections, not able to know well but it's the transitions that create the narrative arc. And I really can't explain. Fierce Attachments, this book that Jordy is referring to, which is the first memoir I wrote, it is based in the story of, I grew up in a tenement, in a working class immigrant tenement in the Bronx, and the tenement building was almost all Jewish, except there was one Irish family, one Russian family. It was like that. Most of the streets of the Bronx were like that, ethnically dominated by Irish or Italians or Jews. In our case, it was this. And so there we were. And a woman moved in next door who was a Ukrainian peasant, married to a merchant marine. And she was very beautiful. She looked like Greta Garbo, but she was not too bright, and she was very sexy and loose. My mother was a strict little, respectable little working class woman, and these two bonded. And my mother gave Nettie respectability, and Nettie gave my mother sex. You know, she gave her glamour. And I grew up between them, and I thought I was growing up. I thought these two women were making me a woman. And that's the story I started to tell. But as I was writing it, I saw that I had a lot of unfinished business with my mother, and I didn't know how to account for it, and I didn't know how to make it work. And I couldn't stay with the story of the past when I was 8 years old and growing up between these two. And then one day my mother called me up and said, we walked all the time, she and I. No matter how angry we were with each other, we walked. And one day she calls me up and she tells me that she had just been standing at the corner waiting for the light to change, and a little girl was standing next to her, and this little girl started across the street on the red light. My mother yanked her back and said, "Darling, don't cross on the red, you cross on the green." And this kid looks at my mother and she says, "Lady, you got the whole thing upside down." And my mother said to her, "Kid, you're not going to live to 8. She was about 7. So she called me and she told me this story, and it charmed me, and I decided I would write it down after I'd been stalled in the book. And I did. So then I said to myself, well, nobody would understand what it means unless I set it up. Mom and I always walk. By the time I finished setting it up, I had a piece, and I thought, I've got gold here. So I then developed this structure in which I went back into the past, and then we're walking in the present. And I realized, as this went on, I realized that the first idea of the book, that I was growing up between the two of them, that wasn't really what it was all about. What it was all about was that I couldn't leave my mother because I had become my mother. And that's exactly what, the wisdom of the book set out to demonstrate, to dramatize. And then I went back and I rewrote everything, and again, it seemed natural to me to go back and forth between the two until I felt the two sets of women, this kid and her younger mother and these two women now, until these two sets of women were accounting for themselves to each other. And that's how I discovered how to do what I was doing. And then this book too surprised me in the same way. I found it natural for me to put together all these strands of influence in order to describe what I finally came to feel was a truly contemporary life. And I think it does, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. One of a strand running through this book is about, I guess, being a woman and as a feminist sensibility. There's explicit feminism as well. But I guess I wondered, to what makes this...
To what degree am I a woman?
No. About the feminism of the text. And
yeah.
You would describe it as a feminist text? Or?
Yes,
yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about your feminist politics and the ways in which this kind of leftist sensibility and involvement in a radical feminism politics has continued.
You just said it all. Really. You want to hear about my feminist sensibility? Well, yes, for the purposes of the book, it is someone who is living alone and seeks connection out in the street, right? So the question is, who is this person? Why is she alone? And what's going on with her? A great deal of what's in the book I had in notes for over 20 years. Every time I went out in the street, I came home and wrote up what had happened, but I didn't know what to do with it. And in fact, many years ago, I tried to write this simply as I said, this woman walking the streets of a great city. But in fact, I did not know the narrator of that attempt well enough to make the narrative accumulate. I could not, and editors in New York who certainly were my friends, who liked my work, who were more than happy to be receptive to it, one after another said, I don't know who is talking here. Then I went home and I added a love affair, I added a friendship, and I could not make that person on the street real. And now, all these years later, I guess I did. I know her well enough. The feminism is a kind of an explanation, not exactly for why I am the way I am, but is very close. It's, in other words, my feminism made, how can I put this? My feminism complicated all kinds of relationships, so much so that I said over many years, yes to this and no to that, and yes to this and no to that. I never set out to be alone, never. All I did was, as I said, I could live with this, I couldn't live with that. I could live with this, I couldn't live with that. And that, I do believe, came as feminist sensibility became conscious in me. Feminism was the strongest means of consciousness, of the growth of consciousness in me, to become a conscious human being, which I have always felt was the highest level of life, to become as fully conscious as you can be of yourself in the world, in history, in actuality, in the moment, to take as large a view, as narrow a view, all of this, I have always prized. And over the years of my life, feminism, of all the pieces of my identity, which are many, as they are for everybody, I would say feminism is the one that brings me closest to understanding who I am, why I do what I do, why I live as I live, all the rest of it. Is that an answer?
Yeah. There's so many beautiful moments in the book. One particular sentence that really stayed with me that sort of connected to this was you're talking about love and sexual interactions, and you say at one point, quite early in the book, you write, I prize my hardened heart. I've prized it all these years. The loss of romantic love can still tear at it. Which was
so what? Big deal.
Why so what?
Really? Yeah, it's true. Yeah. What that phrase, my hardened heart, I've always felt, and I'm not alone in this at all, that American feminism has been as whole and as incredibly successful as it was because American women, more than any other population in the world, and certainly that includes European women, they were more willing to look with hard, clear eyes at what they had to look at, were more willing to risk losing the world as men had made it in order to know themselves. European women have never been that willing. When you read Simone de Beauvoir or any of them, if you read carefully, you see they cannot give up the longing for the world as men have made it. Now, having said that, I said that we look with hard, clear eyes at the bare truth as much as we can. It also hardens your heart. It is, to a large degree, one loses the fantasies of romance. I don't mean just sexual romance, romance of all kinds. And so I said in another piece a long time ago that I had developed this hardened heart, and that I prized it because it helped me look at reality as it was. I wanted to look at reality. I didn't want to be at the mercy of fantasies. So the hardened heart, what goes hand in hand with it, often does preclude a romantic notion of love. And yet, of course, we all grow up with romantic love injected like dye into the nerves, and you can choose to give it up, but it doesn't give you up. But it's to that I say, so what? In other words, yeah, right, that's the reality. So what? I wouldn't change it for anything.
And alongside that, something that comes throughout the book is this idea of finding the right one and finding this partner, and I guess, this idea that some people are made for it and others of us aren't, perhaps.
What do you want me to say about that? Give it up.
No. I mean, I guess, to kind of, thinking about this, the way in which, that we're taught this notion of finding the right one, and this kind of, but the way you open that out to thinking about friendships, I guess, and, in particular this friendship with Leonard. And I guess, is it I'm sorry, I'm struggling to formulate this as a question, but I'm thinking about the feminist politics of prioritising friendships or taking friendships seriously alongside romance, I guess, or sexual interaction.
Look, let's straighten a couple of things out here. Feminism is about achieving political, cultural, social equality. It has also complicated all of our lives because the inequality is so utterly structured into all our intimacies. We're all intimates, and it's one of the reasons, one of the ways in which it becomes the longest revolution on record. It's exactly the intimacy, because we're all lovers and wives and daughters and sons and fathers and husbands, and all of that complicates politics, the politics of our lives, and that's all inside us, every one of us, all the time. And yet, so that includes all the things that you're struggling about here, the one, the many. It is true that feminism complicates all these things, but it doesn't have to. What it did do was, in terms of the question, I don't even know if it's such an interesting question anymore, of the assumption that romantic love was a source of salvation. That's an old notion. And once upon a time, like 150 years ago, it was a useful metaphor. People who were living unhappy lives and couldn't identify the sources of their unhappiness would often think, if I only had a great passion, life would be glorious. It would be significant. It would be centered. I would have achieved a missionary sense of life. Well, that proved that was a notion that people had when they had no experience, when life was full of repression, when the cultures were repressed. But by the time I was growing up, we all felt the same thing. So then you fell in love, and you either thought it was a great passion, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. You acted on it, you married, and then in a little while, oh dear, it's not a great passion, I'm not happy. No, now you were living in a time when you could get divorced, so you got divorced, and you said to yourself, oh, well, it's still important, it's just I had the wrong one. So then you do it again, and again, it doesn't work out. And a third time you do it, and you still feel bad. And then you have experience. And then you no longer romanticize the ideal of passion, of sexual passion. You no longer believe that that is where the salvation of your lives reside. You know it's got to be somewhere else. In order to become centered in oneself, which is the name of the game, right, as we're all talking about, you don't really concentrate on, I don't think. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know, you all have to ask your sons and daughters and stuff. I don't think the young do either. You know, I wrote a collection of essays called The End of the Novel of Love, and it turns on this thesis. And it shocks me how many young people love that book. It really shocks me. People in their 20s and 30s are constantly reading this book and acting as if I'm telling them something they want to hear. And all I'm saying is, it's not a great metaphor anymore. You can't write a great novel. You can't write Anna Karenina. You can't write Emma Bovary anymore with romantic love at the center. It's just, it won't stem. So let's give it up, all right? Let's go somewhere else.
And on that note, we will open for questions from the audience. If anyone has any questions.
Yes.
Thank you. That was really inspiring.
Oh, good.
Thank you very much. I guess your point too about the fallen comfort that one might find in romance made me think about your ideas of loneliness, individualism, and feminism. And that I was wondering if you could talk about your relationship to religion in that way, because it feels like on the one hand... I have none. Well, I just wanted to...
What?
Because it feels like religion in a way is about community, and you have...
Religion is about community?
No. Religion can be about community, but it can also be about the ideas of salvation and that kind of comfort that one finds in romance. One could, 150 years ago, as a way of, finding the missionary of our lives, could be through romance, but it could also be through religion. So I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, and if that is of interest in your identity and in the way that you...
No, it's not in mine. But no doubt, a religious calling or a passionate response to religion, but not to the idea of community, to the idea of God. I mean, to an idea of a greater being, of a larger being, of an oceanic sense of communion with the world at large, with the mystery and the beauty of existence. That is what. But I don't have any such feelings. I don't have a religious bone in my body. I'm secular to the core. But out of that secularism, I prize human life. I mean, I prize human existence immensely. And I think I can feel as deeply for the pleasure, for the beauty and the power of being alive as anybody, but it's not attached to it.
I'm not surprised by your answer.
I'm not surprised that you're not surprised.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
You talked about, in one of your interviews, about writing being a really difficult and painful process for you, and I was wondering, is that still the case? And if so, how do you manage it and still produce such wonderful writing?
What can I say? That's not an answerable question. It'll always be difficult and painful. And the kind of writing I do, the personal narrative, V.S. Pritchett, great English nonfiction writer, he once said of this work, it's all in the writing, you get no credit for living. And that is, of course, how I feel. It's the stories that I fashion out of actuality. It's all in the writing. So what you struggle with is the writing all the time. And it never gets any easier. It just doesn't. The hardest thing in the world is to think. It really is. It's the hardest thing in the world. I'd rather break stones than have to sit down and think. And I avoid it like crazy. I consider myself a very underachieved writer. I've written, but I'm old. So I've written a lot. but I haven't written anywhere near as much as I've always felt I should have been writing. And that's because I wasted so much time being depressed, anxious, every damn day. I go through that, and they're just all smokescreens. They're just ways of not doing the only thing that actually is exciting and rewarding and makes life worth living. That's what you call neurosis. You just don't do it. You don't do the very thing that would save you, and that does save you. And eventually you do it, and that's, what can I tell you? And I can't tell you how. I can only tell you that it gets done because I keep doing it. And there's nothing else. Practice, practice, practice. There's nothing else to say.
As a lifelong New Yorker, how did the collapse of the Twin Towers affect you and the city?
Oh, it was pain upon pain upon pain. I was there, and I live in Greenwich Village, just a couple of miles from the Twin Towers, and I was out on the street at 9 o'clock in the morning, like a million other people, standing on I live, as I say, in the Village, standing on 7th Avenue, watching those buildings go down. It was horrifying. I don't think anyone who saw it can ever get over it. It felt like the world changed forever. I never again felt lighthearted about being American. I never again felt lighthearted about New York. For 6 weeks, I'd run into people, they'd say hello, I'd start to cry. And everyone I know felt this way. It was as if the whole human race was being homicidal and suicidal at the same time. And I think it permanently changed the city. I think it made it much kinder, actually. People now in New York are much kinder. They're ready to interact, ready to help and to say hello and to laugh together and I don't think it's my imagination. I do think that is true. And the rest of it, the hype, all that stuff, the hype, and all of the official stuff that came out about it, none of that is of any interest to me. And all the way the families continue to keep this thing alive through money reparations and this and that, none of that really means much to me. I don't feel obliged to enter into any of it. But the experience itself was unforgettable, and as I say, and it changed a lot. I wrote a long piece about this, and that was that right after this happened, everybody I knew would say things like, gee, I turn on television set, if there's a movie on about New York, I turn it off right away. Or I pass a store where I always saw photographs of the city, I look the other way. And I found that happening to me too. None of us, everybody winced. It was as if that was then and this was now. It was a changed world, and you couldn't bear to look at what now felt like sentimental. And I found myself reading the work of women in Europe who had gone through wars. Natalia Ginsburg, Elizabeth Bowen, Anna Akhmatova. These are the three women I kept reading over and over again. And finally, I realized why I was reading them, because in these countries, women had actually experienced war on the ground, the rubble, the bombs, the world crashing all around them, slogging through rubble for the rest of their lives. They were writing as no American woman had ever written. They were experiencing war the way men were experiencing war, and we had never experienced it that way. And I saw what they were doing, and the reason their work had such power was it had given up sentiment and nostalgia. They too were not looking at the world as it had been. They were looking at the world as it was. And completely, ruthlessly, without sentiment, and certainly without nostalgia. And I actually set myself the goal of writing that way as best I could from there on in. And to this day, I feel that I'd rather see things with my eyes wide open, and certainly not nostalgically, And I still don't. I mean, I still can't look at photographs of New York before, or even watch movies too often that have the city in it. It really is. It was a life-changing experience.
Thank you very much. You have such a way with words. I could listen to you talk forever and ever.
No, you could.
Anyway,
Come on.
you've talked about your life and your loves, and I was just wondering, as a woman now, what your passions are. What do you like doing? What do you hate doing? What do you do with Leonard?
I do the same thing all the time. All I do is read, write, walk, and talk. I would like never to leave New York City again. I don't ever want, I discovered in the last couple of years I have no desire really to travel, although I did want to come to this set of festivals because I was eager to see your country, I mean, on the other side of the world, and I'm very happy that I've come. But in actuality, once I get home, and I don't really know how to answer that. I set a lot of store by achieving peace within myself, and I don't have any passions, but I have, I mean, in particular ones, but I have strong feelings about almost everything, and I think that's my strong suit. I don't think I'm brilliant. I think I have strong feelings, and I know how to make my intelligence serve those feelings, and I want to do that better and better and better until the last day of life, and I hope I will die in harness, and that's about it. That's what I hope to do. I hope finally in this life to write something of lasting beauty and power. Yes, this woman over here keeps raising her hand.
Thank you. Thank you so much for making this trip. It's wonderful. This question may or may not be out of line, so you'll not answer it if it is. I'd love to hear your views as a person living in New York on this strange process that's going on in the US at the moment called an election.
Oh, God.
Would you be willing to comment?
Sure, but I mean, what's the difference what I think? You know, it's okay, we're all horrified by the rise of Donald Trump, right? That's what's on the table. And we're all hoping very desperately that that Hillary Clinton will be our next president. I feel that I know why we have arrived at this moment, and like a million other people, it's just my view. But I really do feel that what we've come to, what Donald Trump represents, is a disaffection of the people of America that is so powerful that they're willing to join hands, join forces with this terrible creature, with this man who is feeding all of the aches and pains and all of the feelings of betrayal and loss on the part of most Americans. Now, I think it goes back to the liberationist movements. I think the 1960s and 70s, which were glorious years for a lot of us and horrifying, frightening years for many others. And that set in motion, you know, all of this backlash. That set in motion the move towards religiosity that has become so powerful. And by the way, America's not a religious country, no matter what. You know, it's a marginal number. It's a marginal number of people who are become fundamentalists, who become born-again Christians, who become Christian by definition, and whom all these politicians are pandering to. But the liberationist movements, which spawned the words gay marriage and abortion, which were on the lips of millions of people from the 1980s on, and none of us ever understood how deep this was going and how full of fear the people of America were. And then on top of that, the terrible betrayal of the economic failures, the economic failures of 2008, and not a single Wall Street criminal going to jail. So all of that together has brought us to where we are, which is a place of such extremity and such recklessness, such terrible recklessness. But truth to tell, I think that what's happening in America is one way or another happening all over the world. It's everywhere. I mean, all of Europe is going right-wing, and I believe that the tumult of these last 30 years has thrown things up in the air. Nobody feels stable. Nobody feels they're living in a stable atmosphere. And above all, 6 million people in America were foreclosed on. 6 million, you know what that means? Thousands and millions of people who were living in houses that they inherited and that they thought they would die in, and they didn't read the fine print, and they lost. They lost their homes. That's a shocking thing. One of the things in Natalia Ginsburg's post-war Italian novels is she's not nostalgic or sentimental, as I said, but she's in a state of shock that the houses came tumbling down. Nobody could believe, no Italian in Italy in 1942 could believe that the houses could crash to the ground. Well, in a way, that's what, of course, that has happened in the States. So egregious have been the crimes of capitalism. But I don't believe that Trump will win. And even if he does win, America is not going to go fascist. It is not going to become a lawless country. He's not going to become a strong man. I believe that the controls of the country have always deprived it of extremity, of arriving at real extremity. And I think that's what would happen now. If he did become president, we would be embarrassed and mortified throughout the whole world. And it would add to the declining power of the United States, which wouldn't be so bad. And that's it. That's what I think. What you think, right? I've just said what you think, right? Yeah, almost millions of us feel this way. So let's hope for the best, right?
So if you'll join me in thanking Vivian Gornick.
Thank you. Thank you. A pleasure.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.